So today we're discussing a user by the name of Just a Sylveon, or as they like to be called, Doodleclones. Get it? They're a clone of Doodletones. As you can probably infer from the name, Sylveon's entire motif on YouTube is to be a clone of the YouTuber known as Doodletones. Based on what it seems like from my perspective at least, Sylveon discovered Doodletones through a Just a Robot video, given how much of a fanboy they are of the guy. And that's generally how a lot of other YouTubers discover her, because of a nearly 5-year-old drama that both Jar and Doodle have put behind them and no longer hold any hostility towards each other. But that didn't stop Sylveon from making a video response to that old YouTube beef, and fucked it up they did.
So a person from the Neo-CC steps away from what they normally talk about to talk about Pokemon and fails every which way you cut it.
A political commentator decides to step away from doing what they normally do to talk about Pokemon, and fail every which way you cut it.
OMG, that's the thing I said, Lamo. It's like we're the same person or something.
Their aesthetic is just Doodle's aesthetic. They've stolen a hefty amount of Doodle's art from all over her profiles and just reposted and recycled it on Twitter and YouTube by Sylveon. Even after being blocked by Doodle, Sylveon will block evade just to obtain the stolen artwork, obtain statements from Doodle's Twitter to respond to, or they'll just grab fan art that they took from other people who made the serious crime of drawing a YouTuber they liked or are friends with. It's a lot of brand impersonation and art theft. They're also opening up a Patreon for that stolen brand, so while I doubt they're even making money off of this, it's still a pretty callous move. Sylveon's ultimate goal is to harass Doodletones off the internet due to a personal grudge that they've built for her over the last year or so, constantly reposting comments or links from the videos that he vehemently hates and spreading it throughout Twitter just for someone to listen to his ramblings. It comes off as desperate, and the reasons they have for hating Doodletones and wanting her off the internet are pretty difficult to justify given the amount of double standards and ignorance that Sylveon displays in their public interactions. They hype up their glorious crusade of wanting to deplatform Doodletones, but if you call them out for anything bad they've done or continue to do so, they are extremely apprehensive. Not even joking, this person right here tried to press them on tons of things they've done, and Sylveon decided to run off and hide. Where'd all that fucking luster go? This situation has caused Doodle an immense amount of stress, to say the least, and no matter how hard people have tried to get through to Sylveon, they'll still continue doing what they're doing, and they're still rationalizing with themselves over a personal grudge about situations that they don't even have any context for or properly comprehend. And I've decided I've had enough. I decided that I'd step in and break this shit down, hopefully explaining why this shouldn't be okay and why a lot of this is being misconstrued by Sylveon themselves. There's a lot to go over, so please bear with me. I know the video's long, but we gotta break down a lot of shit. And I can't think of a better place to start than with some confessions. Confessions and Apologies are two videos cited by Sylveon which link to the modus operandi for their campaign against Doodle. Sylveon spent a long while trying to make sure that people knew about their disdain for these videos in particular, mostly confessions. For now, I want to go over some horrific logic on the part of clones here. Their entire persona, their desire to repurpose and use art of Doodle to try to get her deplatformed and off the internet is directly tied to their feelings on this video, saying that Doodle is a dangerous psychopath for what is described. The content of this video should be pretty easy to decipher based on the title. It's a video addressing and explaining problematic behavior and actions as committed in the past, and being very open about the faults that she's made in her past as a YouTuber. I'll be honest, when this video first dropped, I thought it was a really bad idea given how many people have Doodle on their shit list for reasons as simple as making content that they don't like. This seemed like free ammunition for people who already had it in mind to harass and troll Doodle, turning admissions of guilt into a weapon to be used against her, and despite not having too many correspondences with her around the time of the video being uploaded, I still considered her a friend and I cared about her well-being. Apologies came right after, when a few people noted that there were no apologies in the video, just a list of confessions. So that was rectified, but before anyone could even come in with that criticism, there were already users who were directly mentioned in the video who left comments forgiving her and bringing some old quarrels to a conclusion. So I guess in some respect it worked out. Confessions itself attempted to answer for and explain the behavior behavior's existence in the first place, while at the same time acknowledging the faults behind it.
Needless to say, Dylan was rightfully upset at me and joined this alt-CC in their endeavors with just a robot following in the wings to give the group more of a voice. A voice of which seemed at the time spiteful towards me. Looking back was fairly reasonable, as everyone I knew in that group I had wronged in some way, shape, or form, and continued to do so as I spoke out against them in the worst way I could, deeming them as a group of uncredible trolls who solely out to jerk one off on me, rallied against this supposed us versus them mentality that they never actually showed that they had, called them and others who got roped in a group of borderline sociopaths who wanted to smear my name instead of actually give criticism like they were actually doing, and the list just kept growing and growing, with me getting ever the more defensive of myself because I continued to feel attacked for my stupid August mistake.
Now obviously, Sylveon isn't happy about this and thinks that the video alone should be the reason that Doodle should get off the internet, but I fail to understand exactly how this is warranted and how a consistent standard should be put in place. Like, I get it, the stuff brought up in confessions isn't very commendable behavior. If it was, the video wouldn't even exist in the first place, but in regards to this video, I disagree wholeheartedly that she is a terrible person for going only off of this content here. Doing bad things does not inherently make you a bad person, and the ability to discover behavior and correct it accordingly speaks volumes about you as a person. It's all part of the human experience. Doodletones from 2016 is definitely not the same Doodle that we see today, and I'm not the same person back then either, thank fucking God. We're always gonna have negative perceptions of other people, and we might even use ourselves as a scale. That's just unavoidable. But the standard that Sylveon is using doesn't appear to be a very consistent one at all. It just seems to be this weird set-in-stone mentality, but fails to acknowledge the idea of change. Hell, let's take a YouTuber you like, for instance. I remember a video Just a Robot did last month where he commented on some very serious allegations against YouTuber Seth the Programmer. Just a Robot's video highlighted everything described by the accusing party, and since Jar has done videos with Seth in the past and has had discussions with him before, I figured Jar would approach this situation with his input before he opted to spread potentially false information that didn't allow the accused an opportunity to defend themselves.
Alright, so let's just break down like the process here, because okay, so you said you're gonna get both sides of the story, but you didn't even bother hitting me up. What's the reason for that?
Well, when I said I was looking at it from other angles, I was trying to play devil's advocate and just look over the doc. But in retrospect, I do agree I probably should have reached out to you first.
Yeah. Okay, we agree with that.
Just a Robot's video was basically just one side of an issue and ignored Seth's. I thought this was a pretty dumb move, but eventually Jar did apologize to Seth for this, and I'll accept that. And this isn't even mentioning more bizarre examples like Cinematic Venom's 2-hour-long documentary about his awful behavior before apologizing and leaving YouTube for good. That was a personal decision on his part, and even though his actions were serious, I can somewhat commend him for taking the opportunity to just step away. Now, this isn't me saying that every problematic person deserves to be forgiven by everyone. You're well within your right to not accept an apology or deem that their crimes are really not easy to forgive. This is how I feel about guys like Cosmodor, who have admitted to behaviors and actions that I'm not going to acknowledge, because he continues to make wrong move after wrong move, even after trying to make a genuine apology. But compare the crimes of, like, a groomer who is addicted to negative attention to someone like Doodle, who's made a lot of missteps over the last couple of years when talking to people, including their own friends, and is actually trying to make up for it. I'm not about to say that anything that she mentioned in Confessions was good, but if we were to nail her to the cross for every single wrongdoing she's ever made, run her off the internet forever, then what precedent does that set for how we address anyone else online? I can think of a number of people that I find absolutely abhorrent and toxic and just overall bad influences, but at the same time, I'd rather they have the chance to recognize it and change for the better, or even see that the change happens over time before I ever reached the point of wanting them gone forever. We should have learned from the mistakes of the Spoctor situation, where people immediately took to canceling someone based on the testimony of a few YouTubers who eventually turned out to be fabricating every claim they ever made. In fact, in that situation, the YouTuber who was initially one of the accusers stepped in, recognized what they were doing was wrong, and eventually made the call to help clear things up. This mentality just seems to be spread by Sylveon, and it's absolutely destructive, and it's not even like they themselves follow it.
And now it's time for Silly Songs with Laddie.
Editing phase Bummer Patrol here. I've had to revise and overhaul this video during the editing process throughout this week due to Sylveon continuing to say more stupid shit that requires addressing, which means I have to compile more shit together and add to my script. Not too long ago, he got into a spat with this Nightwing fellow on Twitter where he expounds on why confessions and apologies are bad. I initially said in this video that you don't have to accept someone's apology, and I still stand by that, and if they don't accept it, then fine. I'm not gonna argue against that too heavily. But I also said all that under the assumption that Sylveon was outright refusing the apology, and boy am I a fucking forehead cuckmeister because I was dead wrong. There's a few new claims on the table here from this Twitter conversation that got screen capped, the first one being that Doodle has not changed, and anyone saying otherwise is a lie. The second one being that the apology videos are fake, and the third claim being that she only made those videos so that no one else could criticize her just for sympathy points. If you're gonna casually make claims like this, especially ones where you're grandstanding the intent of another person, you should be able to provide the evidence of such behavior. If Doodle is actually faking her sympathy or being deceptive, I'm sure you'll have all kinds of examples and sources to pull, but since the only evidence I've seen from you are links to these videos, all you've set up is the idea that Doodle's videos are self-refuting? Is that what I'm getting from here? You're using the videos to debunk the validity behind the videos? I mean, you haven't demonstrated this within the contents of the videos, so all of these claims are just bunk from the get-go. If you can't continue to demonstrate why this is the case, then your claims just aren't going to be taken seriously. Well, then there's the issue of the comments that you link, but I'll have to swing back to that at the end of the video since it ties into my final segment and should be addressed there. My main point should stand on its own though. You have no actual substance to back up your arguments. You can't prove your claims with proper argumentation, but you'll still grandstand them. The rest of this Twitter exchange is semi-broken since Sylveon went and did some damage control by deleting a bunch of posts, but since Nightwing is a very calculated person, you can get a lot of context from his replies, so I guess just piece it together yourself. Sylveon uses Doodle's self-deprecating DeviantArt bio to prove that she's fake. The horror. Someone who was known for self-deprecating all the time would have a profile containing exactly that. What a fake fucking bitch you are, Doodletones. I thought we were friends. What are you gonna tell me next, you stuff your bra? Nightwing flips the same logic that Sylveon is using against him by using something that he said against Kai Weiss. I don't actually recall what it is specifically, if it was the Kai Weiss being stabbed comment or claiming that Kai is faking his suicidal thoughts. I mean, take your pick, both of them are pretty bad. Nightwing says that we could just reject his apology and say that he's faking it as well. Not shockingly, Sylveon did not have an argument against their own hypocrisy, and then they ran away from the discussion. Who would have thought that a keyboard warrior would be stopped dead in their tracks so easily? Maybe you should, try again when you have an actual moral compass. If we're going to be deplatforming someone for things they already tried to amend for in a YouTube video, then I'm almost certain someone would be able to make a similar case against you, Doodleclones. Let's take a look at everything we've seen from you so far. Apart from running Doodle off the internet because you don't like her, you're stealing artwork from her from various websites to use as your persona, you're using that artwork to get raffle art from various Twitter users to continue your campaign, you've set up a Patreon for your brand impersonation. Sylveon has tried to defend this by bringing bringing up that the slideshow commentary community uses other people's art all the time without credit. Me personally, I've never done this, but even if you're calling hypocrisy for this, you're still not in the clear because commentators aren't literally using one person's body of assets for their content with the intention of making money off of it like you are, which I'm pretty sure is a TOS violation. You're mad at Doodleclones for how she treats people, but you're going out of your way to harass people like Doodle and Kai Weiss? Oh, and speaking of Kai, we have you telling them that they should be stabbed, genital spamming of their YouTube videos with insults, and accusing them of not actually being suicidal, as if you ever have the right to say that to anybody? Apparently Sylveon apologized for this, but I also get the impression they're only going after Kai because Just a Robot has been dealing with them before. However, the fact that you've apologized for this seems to reinforce my argument from the last segment. You walked back a really bad take and tried to apologize for it, so you clearly want people to acknowledge that, and yet Doodle doesn't get that same validation for, I don't know, some nebulous reason. We also see you throwing around racial slurs, crying about how you should be allowed to say them. There's also the child porn debacle, if you could even fucking call it that. I get that you're not an adult, but I really don't like the idea of you sticking with this lolicon mentality, or the fact that CP is only bad when people are getting hurt. I mean, porn in general has an effect on the psyche, and continuing to engage in looking at artistic depictions of children is pretty heinous. I've mentioned in a prior video that this behavior leads to some awful consequences as a result. Jonathan Ross, he admitted to expressing rape fantasies, school shooting fantasies, desires to physically assault children, and even tried to manipulate his own friends into killing themselves. This person not only admitted to watching lots of lolicon, but even eventually started working at an elementary school. Then he tried to date girls on Roblox, a website that has a massive player base of young children. No one is getting hurt during the act of looking at it, but your argument is ignoring what the effects of looking at it will do to someone's brain, especially to people on the internet who are already very dangerous and mentally ill. I don't know how else to tell you this, but whoever's feeding you these arguments, they're not very smart and they're not very good role models.
And now it's time for Silly Songs with Laddie.
Editing phase bummer again, and I thought I'd add a bit more to this given how hefty the topic is and how people like Sylveon and even Carmen Rider depict the reasons for it being permissible. In fact, this whole notion of just them trying to defend something as serious as this with such single-celled reasoning is rather alarming. Like I said, he's looking at this from a very narrow perspective, and the logic being employed by Sylveon doesn't seem to be very consistent. And this screenshot of them saying not to lewd this particular character unless they stay 19 years old, but we have a giant defense of how cartoon drawings of children isn't child porn because no one is getting hurt. There's a very clear contradiction between these two different opinions, and I have absolutely no idea what their position is. I'm led to believe it's the latter if they're fucking up their own position this badly. I don't get why the distinction of pornography, or even child pornography in general, has to have this distinction of causing physical harm to people. Like, do you not know what pornography is? Pornography as a whole doesn't have to include real people in it. The term covers a wide variety of media, including drawings and even books. Why is something like 50 Shades of Grey considered erotic romance novels? Because the literary aspects of E.L. James's novels contain lots of descriptive sexual content. Would you just buy a hentai manga in a Barnes & Noble? No. You'd likely be getting something like that from a pornographic distributor. Like, Sylveon draws a line in the sand if real people are being depicted in the drawings, but I don't know why that's the point of contention for them. If drawings are a work of fiction and clearly different from real life CP, then what's the harm in taking creative liberties with real people? What would be wrong with the Shadman drawing of Keemstar's daughter? This is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that that's permissible. I'm saying that I don't get why there's a distinction, why the distinction is important, and how that changes the argument. Because again, Sylveon doesn't understand what porn is and how it works. So none of this just seems to make sense to me. So it's all just meaningless to be having an argument with someone who doesn't even know what they're talking about.
But recently, Doodleclones has also been retweeting shit about how lolicon isn't actually pedophilia, which is an even worse take and blatantly untrue. If you are fantasizing about children, then you are a pedophile. There's no way around that. Just because it's a drawing, you're mentally inscribing an actual child onto that. You can't get around that. You're deceiving yourself if you're trying to fucking, get around that. I'm sorry, I'm going off script right now, but I don't know how you can just fucking think that that's the case. There are a number of just logical and psychological loopholes that you're going through to try to defend this. You don't just get to say that that's not pedophilia because of my feelings, though. I don't know who's telling you this, I don't know how you've come to this conclusion, but you just can't say that.
And now it's time for Silly Songs with Laddie.
Hey, it's me again. I'm back so soon because I feel like this needs a better explanation as well. Mostly because, prior, we went over some weird debates on pornography, which is fine enough, but now we're actually on a claim of pedophilia in general, and that's a subject that you can't just be making claims about so offhandedly and spuriously. And I don't really know where people like Sylveon get this impression from, but I think it's this video that contains the full extent of their arguments because they won't stop retweeting it and posting screenshots of it. And this video was made by some guy on Twitter who just basically compiled the video together just to get people to block him. It was flame bait, so yeah, go figure that Sylveon's only sources are from people on Twitter, the most reputable sources in educational journalism. This video basically says that real children look different from anime children, therefore wanking it to real kids is pedophilia, but drawings are completely fine. If you wank off to drawings of children, then you're normal, I guess. The implication here is that there's a difference between being a pedophile and masturbating to drawings of kids, which makes no sense when you actually think about it, because pedophilia falls under paraphilia, which is a series of sexual urges that draw from atypical sources, and the sources don't have to be tied to physically existing real-life children. Personal fantasies and desires are also a factor, so if you're reading a novel or a short story in which a young child is engaged in a sexual situation, drawings and images would also count. The separation between fantasy and reality in this instance does not necessarily go away because of fictional simulation. You're still getting the arousal from children or young teenagers. And that's just set in stone. If you're okay with it in a fictional format, then you're not able to break out of that barrier. All you're doing is trying to make yourself the special exception. Basically just deceiving yourself into thinking that you're on some kind of moral high ground against people who get stung on Hansen versus Predator. Now, I'm not calling Sylveon a pedo myself because, as far as I know, they're 15 years old. That'd be stupid. But maybe they also shouldn't be making pedophilia claims when they don't know anything about the topic. Don't just turn to people on Twitter for your information. Don't turn to people like Common Writer for information. Don't turn to all these fucking people for information.
So this is already quite an interesting array of awful takes and behaviors, but you're also someone who's very clearly valuing your own reputation because you were scared shitless by Septipaw's video about you and you thought it would cancel you, despite knowing that your behavior is not okay, that you're intentionally ignoring Doodletone's apologies and amends in order to run her off the internet. You don't want the very same thing to happen to you over far more serious actions that you've taken. Then again, I also don't expect you to even comprehend any of this. Hell, we still have one last thing to go over. The main reason you're doing what you're doing in the first place. The person you vehemently defended the honor of. An abusive, child-grooming furry. Oh, I wasn't looking forward to this one. Let's have a talk about V Omega, who is the sub-reason for why Doodleclones is doing what they're doing. Confessions is the primary source. but it's V Omega's story in particular that Sylveon has decided to latch onto the most. And given my correspondences with Sylveon in the past, they very clearly don't understand who V was, why in particular people had a problem with them, and don't even seem to care, which is very concerning behavior. That's right, Sylveon apparently doesn't even know V on any level. Never met them, doesn't even know who they are outside of what they've heard from confessions and the comments that they repost constantly. They just simp for V and use them as a moral cudgel for their crusade against Doodleclones. And let me just say, as someone who used to be friends with V Omega, this is both hypocritical and extremely misguided for countless reasons. V Omega is the worst possible person to be standing for. These comments that you're using are not only from V Omega himself, the Neo-Alt-CC account being his alternative account, but the people that have been trying to defend V have not ended up in the best positions, let's just say that. I'll go over their history, some of it from my perspective as best I can. Keep in mind that V has abandoned their accounts about a year ago, deleted everything, and has taken refuge in the furry community under a different name. I'll swing back to that at the end of this segment, but I mention all of this because my personal conversations with them on Twitter are long gone. I can't even access our DMs through Discord anymore, so the only thing I can really go off of are memories through our correspondences, and then maybe some stuff that I took from a Discord server that I was able to rummage up. But just keep in mind, I will be using screenshots to the best of my ability, but my personal correspondences don't have any of that, so just, you'll have to take my word for that. If you don't believe me, whatever. I met V back in January of 2018, not long after I started making YouTube videos after a long hiatus, and we hit it off pretty well. They were very friendly, very smart, and in the community that we were a part of, they were already building quite a reputation for themselves. Their videos seemed pretty concise, very in-depth, and a lot of people really enjoyed them. Both of us eventually made it into the Cloud Palace, which took over as the largest commentator group within that community, and things seemed to be going pretty well. That was until they became a lot more combative and a lot less interested in having cordial debate. If someone disagreed with them, then they would fire back in the most condescending ways possible, and tried his best to make sure he walked away from the argument as the victor, regardless of how correct his position was in the first place. He would talk down to people, he'd berate them, he would shotgun everyone with constant walls of text after the other, trying his damnedest to overwhelm you with a wall of logic in order to get you to submit. Keep in mind that this is actually a very common tactic used by very manipulative and abusive people online, especially if they spam you with dozens or even hundreds of messages. This was a V Omega staple. It's basically just like an advanced form of gish galloping. His content, which started out pretty good and received a lot of praise, started to become more focused on ego flexing. In fact, it seemed like everything he did was just to prove his false sense of intellectual superiority. He'd cover his friends' videos, not interested in helping them, but just so he could prove that he's smarter than them and the best commentator in the world. He almost made a video on me and basically bragged how great he was gonna look by doing so because of how awful my video was, and I mean, I don't necessarily fault him. I'm sure most of my videos on my old channel were bad. I mean, I also don't care if people commentate on me. Fucking go ahead, I don't give a shit. But I'm not interested in people doing it for self-filleting reasons, especially from a fucking pretentious furry who specializes in dishonest debate tactics about fucking Pokemon of all things. A massive red flag came in when V started going off on a former commentator by the name of Bomberatsu, where they were in the live chat and V just started to berate them for the next, well, duration of the stream, just because Bomberatsu asked when they could come in. It was such a horrible move that the stream had to be privatized. Oh, and keep in mind, Bomberatsu was 11 years old. V was about 18 years old. So I was actually able to find all the old messages in the Cloud Palace Discord of this event, and I'll share the highlights on screen right now. The discussion was basically him trying to justify why he should talk to anyone however he saw fit, no matter what their age was. Really concerning in hindsight, but we'll get to that later. I got involved while I was walking to work, and the level of reach that a legal adult was trying to take was insane. The amount of balls it took for a grown man to flex his fucking ego on an elementary schooler. I never thought I'd see anything like it, let alone from someone who was doing it unironically. V eventually did apologize for this, so I'm not holding it over his head too heavily. This was just the inciting incident for why I needed to keep an eye on his behavior. And as you can imagine, it didn't improve at all. In fact, most people were getting sick of talking to him because of any potential fight that would arise from pretty much any discussion at hand. And as you could tell, it would just become a giant fucking diatribe from a furry who was just basically the equivalent of an egotistical keyboard warrior who valued winning an argument above all else. So some of us who were in the Cloud Palace also occupied a separate group that we used in order to explore content that we wanted to make on a different group channel. And I don't remember who came up with the idea, but someone basically compiled something called the Complaints Department, where we confessed a lot of our negative feelings towards V and why we were uncomfortable with him. And this was not the best idea in hindsight, I will admit that. If I had the opportunity to go back and not do it, I would. Actually, these are my thoughts right here. I think I was probably the one who went the easiest on him, because at the time I still considered him a friend. I just was not happy with how he was treating people. But that's not even mentioning the people who fucking went off on him in that page. Like, the first 5 pages were written by a former commentator named Ray Kohai, who was, well, admittedly another really problematic and horribly abusive person, but rereading their segment brought back a few more memories. Like the time they were harassing a small YouTuber named Kongi Muller to the point of literal fear. Those were fun times, weren't they? Bullying and harassing someone who's potentially on the spectrum because he was wrong on the internet. Or how he yelled at a 12-year-old Umbrus for having a somewhat bad take on gore spamming in Discord, and V compared it to not calling out KKK members for lynching black people. Yeah, that V was kind of extreme. V was not happy to see this document, and I really don't blame him. This approach was not a very good idea in hindsight, and he felt like his friends were shit-talking behind his back, and I get that. People should have been more upfront, but this also would have been about 3 years ago, and most of the people that V was trying to flex on and degrade were teenagers. Teenagers who mostly just like to talk about video games. So trying to flex on people still in high school, still gaining real life experience, is not a very fun thing to witness or deal with, let alone having a small debate with you about minor issues that turn into intense arguments where you just have to prove how big your fucking intellectual dick is. And I'm not trying to like delegitimize anything that like the younger people in the group were saying at the time. That's not what my goal is. I just want to put into perspective for all the people out there that V was like messing with the wrong crowd. He was trying to prove how much smarter he was, how more informed he was about like fucking politics against teenagers who are still learning about that shit. It was not a fair fight, and it was not something that they really wanted to deal with, and I fucking felt for them. Anyway, not long after this, V was removed from the Cloud Palace in a way that wasn't very tactful, I'll admit that, but at the same time, it felt a lot better not having everyone in the group feel on edge all the damn time. But this incident didn't stop V from being problematic. In fact, it just encouraged him to show his true colors. So let's talk about the Cosmo situation, and to give some very brief context for this, and unfortunately most of the screenshots aren't easy to come by since V's Twitter is gone, so I'll show whatever I have on screen when it's applicable. Borg Productions had made a video discussing his thoughts about gay marriage or the LGBT, I don't fully recall which one, but most people didn't like it very much. 2 of those people were V Omega and a very close friend of mine named Cosmo Stardust. Now keep in mind, at this point, V identified as gay, and Cosmo was identifying as a lesbian. So both of them very clearly saw similar issues with the video from the perspective of being in the LGBT. V made a script to cover it, and a lot of people went to check over it, Cosmo being one of them, and keep in mind this was and still is a common practice in the community. People check scripts all the time to make sure that there's no critical errors. Everyone does their best to make sure that our friends and our colleagues don't put out content that will be problem-ridden or bad. Cosmo looked over it, and I don't think she thought very much of it since she was going to make her own video anyway, but V took this as a sign that she plagiarized his script, since apparently Cosmo's points were similar to his. And while I'd understand this if V had a unique take or had a very out-of-the-box thought process, I would say no, he did not. Borg Productions is not the most concise YouTuber, and his thoughts on the LGBT at that point were fairly common from what I recall, and the arguments that were made between V and Cosmo weren't exactly Harvard-level, out-of-the-box reasons for objecting to Borg. They're both smart people who had very informed takes on basic LGBT complaints that you'd hear from any other anti-LGBT content creator. That's not a jab at Borg's expense, by the way. I got nothing against the guy. It just wasn't a very good video on his part, I'll say that. But the key thing that V was missing is that anyone, especially people in the LGBT, would likely come to similar conclusions to him, considering that they have to live through being harassed and dejected constantly in society. V couldn't possibly accept this as the case, even from the perspective of being a publicly gay man, and continued pushing this accusation of plagiarism against Cosmo for months. Cosmo was very upset and tried reaching out numerous times to explain that she didn't do anything of the sort, but V was a fucking egocentric dipshit, and it always had to be about him, so very clearly, he didn't listen. Well, I mean, we all thought he did at one point, for about a second, and then one of his friends and former boyfriend named Neko Koda published a video on Cosmo in October of 2018 where the plagiarism accusations were included at the very end, which obviously hurt Cosmo. Oh, and you want to know the best part about it? In the comment section was V trying to stop people from commenting on the plagiarism accusation by using Cosmo's mental state. Yeah, that's right, the distress that he put her through for months was now his own shield from criticism. Needless to say, none of us were happy. Cosmo railed on him, I railed on him, and so did another YouTuber named Vabzakin. You might know them as Dulu. And then he went to Twitter to basically say, if you bring this drama up to me ever again, I'll block you. So I called him a pussy and then he blocked me. And I'm not wrong, he was a giant coward who was absolutely keen on harassing people for months, failed at manipulating people after the fact, and now he shuts down when people see through his bullshit. I don't hold too much of his 2018 actions against him since he tried to make amends for a lot of them, but looking back in hindsight, this one was just appalling. Now, a few months before this, he and I had a run-in where our friendship ended, and it basically came down to him airing out every problem he ever had with me, and me airing out every problem I ever had with him, and some of it was kind of obnoxious because he basically was holding me accountable for actions that other people did, bringing up, oh, Avi Haltman did this to me, and Kirby Star Warrior did this to me, and you weren't there to defend me. Keep in mind that at this point I was a very busy guy, and I spent most of my time working a lot of the day, and V knew this about me, so I had no fucking knowledge of all the drama he was getting into, or what fucking YouTubers were on his ass that day. I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't know any of these situations happen, and yet he was still trying to use this against me for some reason. And keep in mind, this also started over a discussion about a meme, so that made it even more annoying. After the Cosmo thing, he unblocked me, but then he blocked me again about 3 months later from a situation I don't really remember. I just remember I wasn't in the right on it, and I remain apologetic about that to this day. But apparently it turns out that he hated me because of an apology I put out to him where I mentioned that we were making our friend named Joni Rue very anxious, and because of that I decided to set aside our differences so that we wouldn't be hurting our friend anymore. That was the motivation behind me just apologizing. Let's just do this for the sake of our friend. And apparently that was him accusing me of being emotionally manipulative and abusive? Even though I wasn't using it against V, I was fucking telling him that one of his best friends is having a serious negative reaction to our fight and that we need to stop. I feel like you should have known what emotional manipulation was at that point, given what he did to Cosmo, but I digress. I legitimately felt like shit for this, but V basically told me that he fucking hated me because of this and said that he was going to take revenge on the Cloud Palace. Yeah, this is turning into a weird fucking anime moment. He basically told me that if any of us distance ourselves from the Cloud Palace, that we'd be safe from his wrath, but he was out for blood as well. And this was a discussion that occurred because the Cloud Palace made a really bad video that they didn't like. And V took this as an opportunity to use his friends to go after the Cloud Palace and try to, like, basically try to destroy them at this point. Like, I get that he had his reasons for hating the Cloud Palace, but he also had no self-awareness as to why people were against him. Now, I lost a lot of respect for him when he abused my friend for months. I lost a lot of respect for him when he felt the need to keep screaming at children on the internet. I lost a lot of respect for him when he harassed Doodleclones about a fucking collectathon platformer discussion. Or like I mentioned, when he unblocked me just to tell me he was going to destroy the Cloud Palace and take everyone down with it. But he'd have you believe that he's not malicious at all and that everyone over-exaggerates it. Anywho, V and I did end up burying the hatchet around, like, the end of 2019 because, well, we just wanted to be done hating each other. We never really became friends ever again, but we would correspond every now and then about, like, drama that we had our thoughts on. shit like that. This time, it really seemed like V was trying to change, and I was willing to hear him out on the dramas that he was interested in. It wasn't very frequent, but all I ever wanted was to just set aside our differences. V himself still harbored a lot of resentment for people in the community from what I gathered, but I wasn't really paying attention to that, and I didn't care, so we were just doing our own thing at that point. But then, in June of 2020, Joni Rue dropped a Google Doc about how V Omega groomed and abused her. That's right, the Joni Rue that I just mentioned before, who was V Omega's best friend, was apparently groomed and abused. Now, on one hand, I wasn't shocked that there was abuse involved because of V's history of horrible manipulative behavior, but a grooming accusation coming from Joni of all people was... I can't even really describe what my thoughts were at the time. It's still kind of hard to wrap my head around that happening. The only person who was willing to give V the benefit of the doubt whenever they were in the Cloud Palace, who stood up to defend them at any opportunity, whether he deserved it or not. Joni was the reason I decided to make amends with V because of how much anxiety we gave them over a fight. Now she's coming out and saying that V was worse than any of us could have ever imagined. Apart from the introduction, Joni wrote this twitlonger in a segmented format where it goes over what V did to her. The first section was the grooming accusation, and the screenshots were not only provided by Joni, but by V Omega himself. That's right, V was stupid enough to give his own grooming evidence.
This is also really funny in hindsight because V went to Twitter to talk about how people shouldn't be making claims without evidence and how they should dismiss the grooming accusation, but giving your own evidence for why you're a groomer after making that claim is fucking stupid.
Back during 2018, Joni was about 16, going on 17, and despite turning 17 in February, V apparently recognized a pattern of Joni being into suggestive art and pushed forth to draw pornography of Joni's OC and send it to them. This isn't an uncommon pattern of behavior, because they also sent furry porn to another underage YouTuber at the time named Dulu, so I know this isn't false. Joni also mentions that they weren't into pornography, but over time V continued to pursue their desires and kept making advancements on Joni until they caved in, eventually reaching the point where V was doing full-on sexual roleplays with Joni at the time. And again, keep in mind that Joni was about 16 to 17 years old and V Omega was an adult. The argument from some people made is that V is Canadian, so laws would be different there, but given the actual predatory behavior at play in these screenshots and their attempts to coerce and break down Joni's barriers of porn disinterest, their general etiquette of talking to minors on the internet, this very well should have been something that V would have known better than to do. This isn't just like an age of consent dispute, this is actually devious and disrespectful behavior that attempted to gain sexual gratification at Joni's expense. If Joni laid it out clear as day that they weren't interested in any of that, your first instincts would be to drop it there and never engage in discussions like this, ever, with underage people on the internet. Doing otherwise, like what V did, is something we could classify as corruption of a minor. The next section is about their first relationship with another individual. I believe this might have been about Buddy, who was the person who initially approached me about Joni's anxiety attack, but I could be wrong there. But apparently this relationship came to an end because of V Omega as well. Joni Rue is a transgender woman and finally came to terms with this fact, but was afraid of losing their boyfriend, something that they shared on a private vent account, which was leaked by V Omega to her boyfriend, and then V berated Joni for it, and about transgenderism being some kind of fad movement, like people were wearing bell bottoms or some shit, and about how transgenderism is basically just another fad like bell bottoms and collecting pogs. In fact, why don't I skip ahead to mention that? Joni went to Reiko High, one of their current partners, likely due to the fact that she'd be more understanding of the circumstances than V would. I mean, keep in mind that V had been trying to make sexual advances on her for years at this point, under the presumption that Joni is a gay male. Sylveon brings up a bunch of remarks from the comment section of Confessions, where Doodle apparently gone at people for thinking that they're trans. This comment was made by V, by the way, and, well, apparently V doesn't get the same standard, because when Joni came out, V was extremely unhappy, calling her a trans trender and saying that it's not true, and just expressing very general disrespect for her choice. This was eventually the reason why V was cut off from Joni's contacts. Then the final section is about mental abuse, which is something that we've already covered with Cosmo Stardust and people of the like, so I'm not shocked that this was done to one of his closest friends for the last 2 to 3 years. This section highlights a trait that I mentioned earlier about how V doesn't treat his friends like friends, more like in intellectual conquests. If you say something that he disagreed with, it was the perfect opportunity for him to step in, barrage you with messages about how you're wrong and how much more informed and smart he is. V also decided to use Joni's breakup against her, trying to install the idea that she didn't actually love her boyfriend, which, legit, go fuck yourself. That is absolutely not your place to comment on, and you have no right to say this about anyone, you actual piece of shit. The overall summary ends and describes Joni's feelings that V wanted to control Joni, which is very possible. V coming off as a hyper-controlling, manipulative, daddy dom-like figure is not out of the realm of possibility. When Joni came out as gay, they were fine with it, but if Joni thought they were trans, suddenly the supportive best friend act gives way to a very different person that can't and won't accept any change of this magnitude. Looking back on everything, Joni was extremely devoted to V. They were constantly defending them and would come to me if I ever stepped out of line. V must have recognized this devotion and completely abused it for their own self-interest, for their own sexual desires. It's fucked up and I don't blame Joni for feeling this way. V is an actual scumbag for everything they've done here. And that's not all. More stories of V's antics were made public by ex-associates and victims of his abuse. Neko Koda eventually also came out about V Omega, though sadly their Twitter and YouTube are gone now, but to paraphrase what happened, Neko Koda and V were in a relationship and they met up a few times in real life. Neko recalled an instance where they were having an intimate kiss and continued to push their luck as V tried to go further after Neko Koda blatantly told them to stop. So basically sexual harassment and defying consent. Then there's his former friends who have cut him up and talked about how he lied and conditioned them to believe his narratives just to use them for his vendettas. People that are not only apologetic for what they've done, but were victims to a manipulative person who saw his friends as just pawns. Then there's the time he and some people raided and spammed a fellow named Michael multiple times for exposing a YouTuber that was raiding other people's servers and sending death threats. That's quite ironic. Anytime a server was made by Michael, V and Co would spam it with harassment and threats. Keep what I said in mind about his former friends, though, because everyone who engaged in that behavior has apologized for doing this and doesn't stand behind it. This is entirely on V Omega for basically just using them. This is also just another good example of V using vitriolic and harassing countermeasures against people who commit the heinous crime of not agreeing with him on the internet. Repeated and continuous harassment campaigns, something that Sylveon should be all too familiar with. We have another Google Doc verifying this incident from another person's perspective, how V raided Michael's server just because of a disagreement and for V being banned. And then there was one that I sadly don't have anymore that came from V Omega's ex-husband. Yes, V was married. Since I don't have it and I don't know what happened to it, I won't spend too much time on it. If anyone knows where it is, feel free to post it in the comments section or send it to me. It's been a good deal of time discussing the emotional abuse V rendered on them, described their superiority complex, and treated him the same way he would treat any of us in any of his debates. And I believe there was even a cheating scandal in there too. And that's not even mentioning what Doodle had to go through, as listed in her own video. V Omega planned to address the grooming accusations in a 400-page document that I assume was going to be a self-serving gaslighting mess. If it's going to be that fucking long, but I guess V eventually deleted everything and took refuge in the furry community, where people involved in the fucking Caro the Wolf drama would start defending his ass. That's the hill that Sylveon wants to die on? You really want to defend their honor and prove why Doodle is so much worse than that, even without taking subjectivity into account? Looking over these comments, there's clearly something amiss. Most of these comments were really oddly worded and filled with run-on sentences. Also just tons of self-pity. I felt like I'm reading a statement from Todd Rogers. Now Doodle covers these in her own video, so just go see that. I'm not gonna go into this. I'm getting kind of worked up as it is. I don't know if my monotone voice is fucking expressing that, but I'm really not. I don't want to keep going on about this. It's pissing me off. Either way, this is ridiculous. Doodleclones, Sylveon, whatever I'm gonna fucking call you, you're a walking disaster and seemingly unaware of what lies ahead for you if you keep this behavior up. So the original ending to this video was going to be a summary of everything we discussed throughout, highlighting exactly why the behavior Sylveon shows is not just hypocritical, but really malicious and destructive toward the concept of changing in general. And the very last thing I asked would have been something along the lines of, what kind of person do you want to be? The kind that lets people move on from their past mistakes, hold it over their heads forever, just move on and do your own thing. It was a tightly knit ending that I doubt Sylveon would have listened to, because listening in general is not something that they're good at. But then, something happened that illustrated my point about 100 times better than my stupid script. You see, a commentator by the name of Automagic Critic recently made an apology to Doodleclones, and there were a lot of people who were pissed off by it. Automagic was a pretty hardcore Doodle hater, someone who had encouraged harassment campaigns against her and generally tried to smear her name any chance he could. But somewhere along the way, he reflected on this behavior, recognized it was wrong of him, and somehow believed that Sylveon's recent attack campaign was partly his fault. And he made a pretty solid apology to Doodle and sought a chance to restart with her, and I think that was a solid move on his end. But his fans, or at least the viewers who have a giant Doodletones hay boner, had a meltdown, like an actual temper tantrum. It was really sad to watch. And lately, Sylveon has even been retweeting really old posts from Automagic Critic's account that were insulting Doodletones, and all of this made me realize how stuck in the past these people are. Because these people are really only holding on to this stuff because of the Medicare situation, something that Jim has very clearly moved on from quickly. He made a video mocking Doodle for her old DeviantArt posts, and that was kind of it. I mean, that's nothing compared to what FNGR put up with in the very same video, since he was being made fun of for being cucked by a later revealed pedophile. I mean, keep in mind that right after this video, he went on to expose the real ABDL community because some of its members were defrauding the British government for funding their fetishes. He also went on to talk about the hypocrisy and destructive nature behind the skeptic community, how they ended up destroying YouTube for everyone just because a company gave them money. Then you got dangerous pedophiles like Nick Bates. He even made a video on Daddy05, the guy who was abusing his kids for YouTube pranks. And what about the long stretch where he discussed the furry community who were fucking, abusing, and even killing their own pets for sexual gratification? Hell, they were also grooming younger teenagers at furry conventions. Compared to all of those people, Doodle's worst crime is just having cringy stuff on her DeviantArt that she probably doesn't even stand by anymore. I mean, go figure that a lot can change in the span of 5 to 6 years. Doodle has learned from all of these situations and changed as a result. Mr. Medicare moved on to do more interesting projects than Doodletones. Hell, Just a Robot and Doodle buried the hatchet a long time ago and are on decent terms. These people who cling to a time that's long gone just come off as desperate and sad. Is there really nothing better for you guys to do? And that goes to Sylveon as well, since they're more so led by a sense of justice and just wanting Doodle to repent and leave the internet. No one is inclined to like Doodle by any means, but this Hypocrite's crusade is just sad. And Sylveon isn't helping by getting into their own shenanigans that they're gonna have to answer for later on. If this logic is being used on Doodle, then the same should apply to them. What's their excuse going to be later on for antagonizing people with racial slurs, or telling Kai Weiss that he's faking suicidal thoughts, or endorsing child porn, or trivializing pedophilia? Like, I doubt you want that held over your head once you realize how shitty that behavior is, right? So then why is it okay for you to do it to Doodle? It's not. At the end of the day, none of it's okay. And I think I'm done here. I don't think Sylveon's going to listen. But I just want everyone to keep all of this in mind going forward.